So today, first of all, what I want to do is go through the steps involved in converting sand, which is the raw material for silicon industry, which I said it is plenty available on the earth crust. Okay, any desert you look, it's full of sand, or any beach or river banks, you can find a lot of sand. So it is so plentifully available, and that is one reason why one of the reason why silicon is very popular in semiconductor industry. So what are the steps involved in converting sand to silicon wafer? Okay, silicon wafer, as I said yesterday, it is a single crystalline material. The entire wafer is a single crystal. It may be 30 centimeter. Today it has come up to 45 centimeter, but entirely it is single crystal. Okay, so how do we make a single crystal of silicon which is periodically arranged from left to right or in the entire wafer? So it has for achieving that, we need to go through several steps. The first step is converting this quartzite or sand to what is called as metallurgical silicon. Okay. Now the steps involved here is you take the sand particle inside a reactor and then mix it with carbon. Okay, carbon is basically available in all the coal. Okay, coal is full of carbon, or coke, or even wood chips. Okay, so you can see here coal, coke, wood chips, charcoal. These are all containing a lot of carbon, and so you mix it and heat it, melt it with the help of some electrode heating. Okay, you pass you apply high voltage so that the current will pass through and melt it, and the temperature at which the reactor is operating is around 2000 degrees Celsius, and ultimately the reaction, there are many steps involved in the reaction. If you can see here, first silicon dioxide is combined with carbon to give you SiO. So it is silicon monoxide plus carbon monoxide, and then silicon monoxide react again with carbon to produce silicon carbide and carbon monoxide. Again silicon carbide reacts with silicon dioxide to give you silicon. Okay, plus silicon monoxide and carbon monoxide. Okay, and silicon monoxide and carbon monoxide, which comes out as byproducts, they are gases at these temperature, whereas silicon is in a liquid molten stage. Okay, so you can easily take out through an opening, this liquid can be collected, and that is what we call as the metallurgical grade silicon. The purity of this metallurgical grade silicon is only 98%. So there are lots of impurities inside it, and it is really energy consuming process. Lots of for example, here I have put the number. Roughly 13 kilowatt hour is required to produce 1 kilogram of silicon, metallurgical silicon. Okay, and this metallurgical silicon is mainly used for other industry, especially all the engines in your your vehicles. They are made up of material which involves some aluminum. So to create some certain alloys, they are mostly used in making machines and engines, etc. So only 1% of this metallurgical grade silicon is being used for the electronics industry. Rest of it is going into other industry, aluminum casting industry, and some other alloy based in the silicon alloy based industry. Okay, so the ultimate reaction you can write it as 2C plus SiO2 is equal to is giving you silicon plus carbon monoxide, which is a gas. Okay, the second step involved is converting the metallurgical grade silicon into electronic grade silicon, and this electronic grade silicon is what we refer to as polysilicon. Okay, now polysilicon, as you know that it has polycrystalline structure. Polycrystalline structure means smaller regions in that solid material is crystalline. There is a periodic arrangement, but that is only extending to some region, and after say some 200 nanometer or 300 nanometer you have a new region. So it's like blocks of crystalline structure, and they are joined together with some boundaries. So that is what is polysilicon material, which is also very much used in our chip making, because as we studied the gate material is mostly polysilicon, and polysilicon material has higher conductivity compared to that of pure crystalline silicon. Okay, and higher conductivity is desirable for gate material, but not for the substrate. Substrate has to be fully crystalline structure. Only then you can dope it and vary the property with a proper controlled manner. Okay, so metallurgical silicon, which is it is called metallurgical silicon because mostly it is used in the metallurgical industry. Then electronic grade silicon means that is what we use in the electronic industry. Okay, so how to convert that into electronic grade silicon, which is of high purity. Okay, the purity here from 98% it is going to go something like the impurity will be so less that it is something like 1 part per billion. Okay, so that means for 10 raised to 9 silicon atoms you may have one impurity. Okay, so it is that pure thing. Okay, so how do we achieve that? So there are two steps to this. First step is basically the metallurgical silicon is powdered, grinded and powdered, made into very very fine particles, and then made it to react with HCl. Okay, HCl in gaseous form. Okay, 300 degrees Celsius the reaction is happening. So you can see that here silicon metallurgical grade is dust is poured into, and then HCl is actually is a gas that is also coming inside, and they will react at 300 degree Celsius, and it will produce variety of silicon hydrochlorides. Okay, so there are various stoichiometric ratios which will be formed. One is SiH4, where this is called silane, and then you have monochlorosilane, then dichlorosilane, trichlorosilane, etc. Okay, so there are various products which are formed here, and out of this we need to pick one of them, which is basically this SCHCl3. Okay, so this is what we need to pick, and what we do is in order to pick from many products, in order to pick one of them, we use what is called as the distillation. Okay, so distillation I think is familiar to everybody. So you can see double column distillation is here in the first column. So that will increase the percentage of silicon trichlorosilane percentage compared to the other components. So there is a particular column from which you will get that. Okay, so basically it is gas is converted into liquid, and they are condensed at various temperatures, so that the condensation temperature is different for different products. So you pick it from a particular point, you will get a pure SiHCl3. So the reaction, you can write it as silicon plus HCl is ultimately giving you SiHCl3, which is in gaseous form, and then plus H2. Okay, so which then condensed and taken out, or distilled and taken out, and that is what is input to the next reactor. Okay, so here, and the temperature at which the next step is going to happen. So this is the last, it's called the Siemens type reactor. So that is shown in big size on the right side. So what are the inputs here? Here we have SiHCl3, and it is made to react with hydrogen, and what you will get, 2 SiHCl3, which is in, both are in gaseous state. Okay, and that will give you basically silicon plus hydrogen chloride. Okay, so hydrogen chloride is a gas which can be taken out of, so through this waste gases will be collected out. Now this is a chamber inside which, if you look at this arc shaped one thin rod is placed. Okay, very slim rod of polysilicon material. So that will be just placed here. So the two gases are coming, and then they react, and when the silicon is formed, that will get attached to this, or you can say that it will get deposited. That's the correct word to use. And this process is called chemical vapor deposition. Basically, two gases are reacting and forming a solid. Okay, and the solid will get deposited on the already existing thin rod, or slim rods of starting silicon. So that will get deposited, and so this process continues for sometimes for days. Okay, it's a very slow process. This deposition will grow, so the thickness of this rod will grow, say from, maybe it is starting with something like less than a centimeter diameter, but it will finally end up in some 20 centimeter diameter, etc. Okay, so you will get a big rod, big diameter sized rod of silicon, of polysilicon. So, and the purity of this is very high. As I told you, it is like 1 part per billion. Okay, 1 in 10 raised to 9. So it's highly pure silicon. So that is what we call as electronic grade silicon. Okay, so impurity is something that we should avoid in in the wafer. Okay, so that is the next step. And now after this we need to, so as I said, this is a polycrystalline material, and polycrystalline material, though it is very pure, but it is not a single crystal. So that is a problem. Okay, we achieved a higher purity, but what is lacking in it is that it is not entirely a single crystal. So now we need to go from that polycrystalline structure, which is like portions of crystalline structure. From there we need to go to a single crystalline structure. So there are two approaches to do this. The first approach is what is called as Czochralski crystal growth. Okay, Czochralski crystal growth is Czochralski is the person who invented it. I think he is from Poland, and so this is the setup for Czochralski crystal growth method. So what we do is that we need to take that polysilicon, that big rods that we got, and then that is fragmented into small pieces. Basically you just not powder really, but made it into small pieces, and then put it in this furnace. Okay, put it in this furnace, and then just heat it, and the temperature at which we maintain the furnace is very critical. it is 1470 degrees Celsius. Okay, so polysilicon is broken up into pieces, melted in crucible at 1417 degrees Celsius, and now the way it is to be grown into a single crystalline is by a pulling mechanism. Okay, pulling mechanism means what we do is that there is something called seed. Okay, seed material, that means the beginning material. So that will be not part of the polysilicon, it will be a earlier obtained portion of the crystal, and that need to be aligned properly depending upon what surface you want to create in the wafer. Okay, so if wafer require 100 plane, then your seed material should be aligned in such a manner that vertically the direction will be 100. Okay, so the seed material is inserted into the molten polysilicon, okay, or molten silicon material. You can't say polysilicon because it is melted, so it is molten silicon. You introduce that seed, okay, from top you introduce the seed, you dip it in, and then what you do is basically you pull it gradually, very gradually. Okay, it's like per hour some millimeter, that's the rate at which you pull. So it's very slow movement of the seed material after inserting it into so whenever you insert, so what will happen, the silicon atoms will try to agglomerate underneath the seed material, and as you slowly pull it up, these liquid material or molten silicon will gradually get, once it get out of the melt, as you lift it up, they get cooled in a slow fashion, and then they will get into the right place inside the crystal, because there is a position where energy gets minimized, and automatically it will take those positions, and that is the crystalline structure position which we discussed yesterday, two FCC lattice interpenetrating each other. So that diamond structure, it will automatically form because that is the structure that minimize, or that is the structural arrangement that minimizes the energy of the potential energy of the arrangement of silicon atoms. So that is what happens. So you slowly pull, and another thing that is done is this while pulling, you can rotate it also relative to the crucible. You can rotate it, so that will basically make sure that there is a uniformity. I mean, everywhere the temperature distribution etc. will be uniform. Okay, so that's basically the idea, and the entire thing is done in a argon gas atmosphere, because argon is much better than the ambient atmosphere. Okay, argon is inert and it will not react with silicon, and therefore no such compound will be formed if you introduce argon atmosphere. Keeping it in the vacuum is another option, but it is even better to keep it in the inert gas atmosphere. Okay, so vacuum also, like you can't achieve a vacuum beyond a level. Okay, so you can take out all the gas, but that will vary the pressure at which this entire process will functioning. So if pressure is something that is important, you cannot do the process in the vacuum. Okay, so to keep the contamination away, or the contaminants away, one approach is which you can use is in an entire thing is inside a vacuum chamber. Okay, but that is not always feasible when the reaction requires certain amount of pressure. So what is done is basically you introduce gaseous atoms into the chamber, which are inert in nature. So all the last group elements which are very non-reactive elements, so you can introduce them. Argon is mostly used here. So that will provide the pressure requirement. At the same time, they will not react with molten silicon. Okay. Then now you can dope the this crystalline together at the same time. Okay, so as you are making the single crystalline structure, at the same time you can introduce the dopant material into the silicon melt. Okay, if you want to dope it with phosphorus, you introduce some phosphorus atoms into this crucible, and they will also get take the position of silicon in the crystal, and that way you will get say n-type silicon material. And if you introduce boron, then boron atoms will take certain places in the silicon. Depending upon the concentration that you want, you introduce that much amount of fraction of material. Okay, so this is basically a diffusion mechanism where these impurities are getting into the solid crystalline structure and taking active positions. Okay, so active position means replacing the silicon atom and taking its place. Then only it is treated as electronically active. Okay, if the boron is going to sit in an interstitial space, so already there is a silicon crystal, but there are some space in between two or three or four silicon atom, there are some vacant spaces. So if boron sit in that place, that is not treated as active, because electronically that will not change the property of the material, and you can't consider it as a successful doping. Okay, successful doping happens only when the boron atom replaces the silicon atom and take its place in the crystal, silicon crystal. Okay, and similarly it is with respect to n-type impurity also. Okay, so you can introduce dopant material into this crucible and make it n-type or p-type. So that is another thing. And the direction I already told you, the vertical direction should be the direction corresponding to the plane that you require. Okay, if you want 100 plane, the vertical direction should have an alignment of 100 direction. And now the diameter of the wafer, basically you are going to get something like a cylindrically shaped material, as you can see here in the blue, the cyan color. So this cylindrical shaped solid cylinder you will get, and the diameter of this solid cylinder depends upon the rate at which you are going to pull. So if you are pulling it slowly, then what will happen? The diameter will increase. Okay, but if you are pulling it faster, then the diameter will decrease. Okay, and also the rotation speed. Okay, because there will be some centrifugal force which will make which will limit the diameter. So this mechanical movement, which is the pulling rate as well as the rotation speed, angular speed, together they will decide what is going to be the diameter of this solid silicon cylinder. Okay, and we call that solid silicon cylinder as ingot, INGOT. Okay, so that's what. So this is the first method. Now there are some drawbacks for this method, and the drawback is that though we start with a very high pure electronically graded silicon material, but actually speaking, after this process we get a single crystalline ingot, but the purity will be reduced. And the reason for that is because the crucible is made up of silica material. Okay, so in order to hold this high temperature, we need to take material which is stable at that temperature. So what the crucible that we take is basically made up of silica material. Now silica, which has a boiling point, I think something like near to 2000. so it will not melt, but still few atoms. So silica has it's basically quartz material, so it is SiO2. So oxygen atoms, some of them will just diffuse from the crucible boundaries into the melt, and they will basically enter into the single crystal. Okay, so the purity, if you compare, purity is going to reduce because of the oxygen atoms coming out of the crucible boundaries, entering into this single crystalline material. Okay, so the other method, which can overcome this problem, that is the introduction of oxygen into this single crystalline ingot, can be overcome with the help of another technology called float zone crystal growth. Now, float zone crystal growth, what is the idea? You take the rod that we obtained, you don't break it into pieces like we do it for Czochralski crystal growth. We take the entire rod, the thick rod that we obtained. So this is shown here, polysilicon rod, you can see here. And so one end it will be something like this, where you start, so you introduce a seed material and then you heat it. Okay, so heat it with the help of an RF coil. So RF coil will introduce the heat and melt the polysilicon rod and the seed, and they will be joined. And then what we do is that this RF coil, which is melting this polysilicon rod, it is gradually moved from bottom to top. Okay, it is gradually moved from bottom to top, and as you move it forward, what will happen? The upper portions will get melted, and in the melt, from the melt, it will because of gravity, it just flow down and then get solidified at the bottom of this RF coil region, and then that region, it will be a single crystalline region, because as you move this RF coil, the bottom portion will get gradually cooled, and because it is getting gradually cooled, the silicon atoms again will naturally takes the crystalline positions. Okay, so above the rod is polycrystalline, but below the RF coil it is a single crystalline structure. And this is a very gradual movement, just like in the earlier method also, the pulling was a gradual movement, but here the RF coil movement relative to the polysilicon material, that is a gradual movement. So it is with the help of gravity, it moves, the atoms moves down and takes the place of crystalline structure. And as you move up and up, then what about the impurities? So the impurities will not get in, because we are not physically contacting this with any crucible or furnace boundaries or anything like that. Okay, so it's all like happening in an inert atmosphere, and therefore no contamination happens, and therefore whatever is the purity of the polysilicon, that is maintained, but we are able to convert it into single crystalline. So from bottom to top, when it reaches, okay, the rod will be converted into pure crystalline, and this process could be repeated also in order to improve its crystallinity. Now, any crystal that you make, there will be some kind of defects. So though we say it is single crystalline, but there are various kind of defects which can happen, and which we can discuss if there is time today after my basic presentation. Okay, so so we get the ingot. So here you can see an ingot here, silicon ingot. So this is shown in this dark color. Okay, so this is a cylindrical solid structure, and then you can see some kind of pulley mechanism. I don't know whether it is visible to you. Maybe I will magnify it slightly more. Is it visible? Okay, so this is your silicon ingot, this one, and the rest of the things are basically some pulley mechanism, and you can see that lots of wires are drawn or they are rotated with the help of some wire guiding mechanism. Okay, so the feeding is from one side, and the wires are basically going around going around the silicon ingot where it is introduced on one side. So you can see that, and this, if you look at the wires, they are basically coated with diamond particles. Okay, so small diamond particles, and diamond is one of the hardest material that we have. And then when that is actually, these wires are basically used to SAW, okay, SAW, the silicon ingot. Okay, basically you are pulling it with some frictional force. Okay, the silicon ingot is not rotated, it is just held in the position, but these other guiding mechanism, they are basically rotating. So here no cutting action is taking place, but the silicon ingot, since it is held in position, only thing we do is that relatively we will move it up, so that more and more pressure from the wire, cutting wire, will be introduced on the silicon, and they will be basically cut into, or this is basically slicing, and the spacing between the two slices depends upon the wafer thickness that you require. Okay, so wafer thickness ultimately is something like a fraction of a millimeter, some 700 micrometer. Okay, so 0.7 millimeter or 0.8 millimeter. So this is the kind of thickness ultimately that you will get with a single wafer, or that we require with a single wafer, because we need to produce as many number of wafer as possible, and so that means we need to decrease the thickness of the wafer. But there is a problem if you keep the thickness so low, that is the mechanical stability. When you hold the wafer, it will wobble. So in order to avoid that, some minimum mechanical strength should be ensured. Therefore that is what decides your, so it also depends upon the diameter of the wafer. So if it is a smaller diameter wafer, you can have less than 0.5 millimeter thickness. Okay, something like say 10 centimeter wafer, you can have less than 0.5 millimeter thickness. But if you are talking about 30 centimeter wafer, then you require more thickness in order to support it mechanically. Okay, but ultimately we are going to make our devices only on one side of the wafer, and it is basically a surface. So out of this say 700 micrometer, our fabrication will be taking only some the top region, maybe some something like 200 micrometer or something like that. Okay, so the material, the transistors are going to be made only in the one side of the device. So another thing we need to look into here is that if the thickness finally has to be something like 700 micrometer, then we also require some polishing after this. So that is what so this after the cutting of the wafer will be followed with polishing, and the polishing that we do is chemical mechanical polishing. So that means we use sandpaper to polish say metallic surfaces before painting. So everybody might have seen that, right? In order to smoothen the surface before painting or remove the rust from the surface of the iron material, we apply this polishing. Okay, so this polishing is mechanical polishing. Okay, so you are basically doing with a sandpaper. So similar to that, there is a mechanical element in polishing. So you hold the wafer in place and then basically rub it with some material, polish pad it is called, as you can see here. But to enhance the smoothing process, we also apply some kind of chemical which we call as slurry. Okay, so this is basic. This the holder here you can see here, which is going to be get rotated. It can hold multiple wafers on it. Okay, so there is one holder which is shown here, and they can rotate on its axis, and this bottom polish pad also can rotate on its axis relative, so they can rotate in opposite directions. Okay, the bottom one is shown rotating in clockwise direction, and the other depending upon how you look. So if you look from above, that is also clockwise. If you look from bottom, then it is anti-clockwise. So relatively they will be moved, but in the presence of some chemical. So that is why it is called. So that will enhance the roughness to be removed, and you will get a very polished mirror-like finishing of the. So a lot of material will be removed. Silicon material will be removed in this step in order to achieve this polishing. Okay, so in the beginning I showed you a diagram which I want to go once more. Some of the features. Okay, so for example here, so this is like fabricated in India. You can get, there are website which sells these wafers. So you can see that a cassette of 25 quantity wafers, and each of them are 10 centimeter diameter. Okay, so these are some of the most important parameters of a wafer. So its diameter, and then what kind of doping. Okay, then wafer orientation. Okay, and finally the resistivity. Okay, ohm centimeter is the unit of resistivity. So this is a typical. Okay, so doping level will determine. So from doping level you can find out what is going to be the resistivity, or from resistivity you can calculate the doping concentration. Okay, so these are the and one more thing, it is said SSP. SSP means single side polished. Okay, so one side of the wafer is only polished here, the other side is not polished, because that's not important, right? Because we are going to ultimately make the wafer or make the devices or fabricate the devices only on one side, and therefore there is no need to polish the other side. Okay, so single side polish. So polishing information, and sometimes they specify, there are more other specifications, but these are the major specification of a wafer. Okay, the size of the wafer, and then the resistivity of the wafer, the orientation of the wafer, and the polishing information, and the doping material, whether it is p-type. So here it is p-type material that is getting doped. So resistivity can be defined, but if you don't know whether it is n-type or p-type, that is not complete information. So 3-4 informations are very basic. Okay, so now we are going to go into what is called as the various process steps. There are lots of process steps fabrication will go through, and all of this can be better said with the help of pictures. So one of the most important or most deciding process step is the pattern transfer. Okay, transferring the layout pattern that you draw in a software into the chip. So that is what we call as pattern transfer. So you using software tools, we create patterns, and you remember we created inverted pattern, CMOS inverter pattern, and we used different colors. Okay, one pattern for N-well, another color for basically the polysilicon, another color for the P diffusion region, N diffusion region. Okay, they all, and metal region. Now so each of the color corresponding to that there is one process. For each color there is one lithographic process or pattern transfer process for each of the color. Okay, each color is, and usually there will be 50 plus such steps in the current technology. The number of pattern transfer steps will be very high. So the detailed layout contain that many number of colored regions, and they are, each color is taken separately. Okay, they cannot be taken at the same time. So now inverter is a very small circuit, but actually if you look at the processor chip, it's a big circuit with millions of transistors, but the layout will be just one layout. Okay, so if you look at the metal layer, M1 layer, so it will be spanning across the entire circuit. Okay, so that will correspond to one step in the lithography. Okay, so there will be metal associated with the inverter, there will be metal associated with another circuit which is maybe a NAND gate, maybe a D flip-flop. Okay, so these are all in in a very large area, they are all spread across. Okay, it's a huge circuit, right? A processor will have millions of transistors, means, and they are connected, and every of those or most of those transistors are connected to metal 1. So the layout corresponding, the blue colored layout corresponding to metal 1 is not only just for one gate or one circuit, one small circuit, but it is for the entire circuit. So the entire blue color region will be a pattern that need to be transferred onto the chip or into the wafer. So how do we do that? So that pattern transfer, so it's you can to take an analogy, what you can do is that you are building a house. Okay, so some say 3000 square feet area house, and if you are building a house of that big size, usually what we do is like you take a brick by brick and then build one portion and then complete that portion, one wall maybe in a day, and then another wall in another day, like that you will finish part by part. But if you compare that with what we are doing in lithography, what we do is that entire the plan of the building, once one layer is placed everywhere in that 3000 square feet area, one layer, that means one brick is placed simultaneously everywhere. So everywhere it has gone up by 1 unit. Okay, wherever the brick need to be placed, so that is something like the layout or the plan, and you keep it. You don't make one wall first and then the next wall, okay, and begin the next wall. Not that procedure, but we make one brick everywhere you need to build the wall, and then we lay down the next layer of brick in the entire 3000 square feet area, okay, wherever the wall need to be built. So this is how, and then maybe another maybe a concrete beam has to be made. Okay, so wherever the concrete beam is needed, everywhere simultaneously the beam is made. So this is how, so it's like a parallel approach, step by step. Okay, not like one side to another side we go. Okay, so this is the major difference. So how do we do this pattern transfer? Whatever is in your layout, say the metal 1 layout, whatever is there, we need to transfer it into and we need to create that metallic structure according to that layout in the metal layer. Okay, so there is a particular layer corresponding to the metal, and there we need to transfer. If you are doing a P diffusion layer, so wherever the P diffusion is there in all the PMOS devices in the wafer or in the chip area, so wherever that P diffusion has to be done, they all done simultaneously for all the MOSFET, all the PMOS devices in the wafer. So that information will be in the layout. So color by color or layer by layer, depending upon what layer you do, there is one lithographic step. Now lithographic step, if you look at it, so mostly there are various type of lithography. Let me just mention that lithography is divided into many. So there is what is called as photolithography, which is also called as UV lithography, because photo means the light source we are using, and that has a wavelength corresponding to the UV region. Then you have X-ray lithography, then E-beam lithography, and nowadays one more is very popular, which is extreme UV lithography. That is the current, like 5 nanometer technology and all. Okay, so if you look at E-beam is very different compared to all the other. E-beam is basically we are using electronic beam. Mostly this is used to make what is called as photo mask. E-beam lithography is used for making photo mask. Okay, and photo mask is used for all the other lithography, UV lithography, X-ray lithography, extreme UV lithography. All of this uses basically some form of electromagnetic radiation, whereas E-beam lithography make use of electrons which are energized. Okay, so these are the different versions, but what is more popular and mostly used is photolithography or UV lithography. Now the steps of a photolithography is shown here. The first step is to coat a silicon. So we need to make some pattern on a particular layer. So suppose this is a metal layer, okay, and we need to remove the regions where metal is not supposed to be there. So that is there in the layout pattern. The metal is we draw a VDD rail and a ground rail, and then connecting the drain of PMOS and NMOS. So these are the region where only metal should be present, and the other region metal shouldn't be present. Okay, so here it is showing some red color for whatever is that film. So it could be a metal, it could be polysilicon, it could be P diffusion, it could be N diffusion, it could be N well. Okay, and they are not going to be in the entire surface of the wafer. They will be only in certain regions of the wafer, which is defined in the layout corresponding to that color. Okay, so we need to pattern this film, metal film or poly film. We need to pattern it according to the layout. That is our goal. So we need to transfer the software pattern into the film which is on the top of the silicon wafer. Okay, now how to form this film, that is another thing that we can use what is called as deposition. Just like we have seen, you can use chemical vapor deposition where we made poly. So you can have this substrate and then react that trichlorosilane. You can combine it with hydrogen, and those two gas will combine, and this polysilicon will be just deposited, and red color is for actually polysilicon. So we can easily create a layer of appropriate thickness depending upon the duration you do the chemical vapor deposition. The thickness will be decided. So you allow this reaction, chemical vapor deposition reaction, to go for some finite amount of time depending upon the thickness that you require, and then you stop that process. So then you have a film on the top. Now comes the patterning. The first step in patterning is coating it with a photoresist. Okay, resist is basically a polymer material. and which has some light sensitive light sensitivity, okay, or UV light sensitivity. So there are lots of such organic compound, polymer compound, which will vary its property, chemical property, when you irradiate it with light, okay. So they are something like a thick liquid, okay, and what in order to coat it the entire region with photoresist, what is done is that you pour out that polymer or resist material on the top, and then you rotate the wafer. That's what actually the way it is done, and it's not a very costly thing. In many laboratories you can find it, maybe in CIT you can find it in the food processing department. So these are most of these chemical or chemistry laboratories, you can find what is called a spin coater. So you drop that thick liquid which has high viscosity kind of nature, and then you rotate. So because of the centrifugal force, this resist material will spread from the center to entire wafer area, and depending upon how much angular velocity you rotate the wafer, that will decide what is the thickness ultimately you will get for the photoresist. So that is how it's a simple process of coating it with photoresist. Second step is basically called pre-baking, which is not shown here. Basically you keep the coated the wafer with the photoresist. After coating it, you put it in a furnace for a short time, and that is basically to raise the temperature and to bake the resistor. So resist, I said, it is a liquid, but once you raise the temperature, it will become like it will solidify, just like what happens in baking, right? So a liquid kind of material, when you bake a cake, you take a fluid kind of material, and then once you raise the temperature and keep it in an oven, it will become like a solid material. So that is called pre-baking, okay. And after that comes aligning this mask, okay. So there is a physical photo mask, okay. So mask already has this pattern made into it, and how to make that pattern in the mask, that is something that we will see a little later. So assume that this mask already has the metallic or polysilicon whatever layer pattern which we are transferring, that is already there. So we align the mask with respect to the chip area, okay. So because there is a particular area where you need to make these transistors or these metal lines, so you need to align it, and then after aligning you irradiate with the UV light from above. So you introduce this light. This is just a schematic diagram, but the detailed diagram I am showing on the right side. So once you irradiate with the light, wherever the mask is blocking the light, the photo mask blocks the light in certain region, it will be transparent to the light in certain region. So if it is a UV light, transparency can be blocked with chromium metal. So chromium is blocking light, and glass will transfer the light. So wherever it passes the light will fall on the photoresist in those region only. And because of the irradiation with light, the property, the chemical property, basically some light dependent reaction will take place and changes the photoresist property. It will absorb light and modify the structure, okay. So the property will get changed wherever light is irradiated, and wherever light is not irradiated, its previous property will remain. Okay, so we have after light irradiation, then the next step is basically developing, okay. Just like in earlier cameras, we use photographic film, and after giving an exposure, you do what is called as developing the film. And developing the film is usually done in a dark room because we don't want any light to go there, and it is just a chemical that you insert into it, and wherever the properties are modified, the chemical will react with the resist in one way, and the other place it will react with another way. So depending upon the way the chemical is going to react, there is two types of photoresist. One is called positive resist and the other is negative resist. So in the positive resist, what happens? The solution will dissolve the material which are irradiated with the light. You can say that because of the irradiation with the light, the material got softened, and it improves the reactivity and dissolvability in the chemical. So it will be just gone. The radiated portion will be just gone in the positive resist. But if it is a negative resist, what will happen? The light will make it inert to the chemical. Irradiation of the light wherever happened, that portion will not react with the chemical. So when you develop it, only the remaining portion where light was not radiated, those portions will be gone. So there are two kinds of resist. So you can find plenty of material with the required chemical properties. So you see that fabrication is a mix of all trades. You need chemistry, you need electronics, you need physics, because all this light diffraction, all this will come into play here. So it is not just one speciality, and you need instrumentation. All these are very costly instruments. So in the process industry, all kinds of people are coming in, and then modeling requires mathematicians. Okay. So this is a detailed structure or detailed diagram of the mechanism, the instruments. You can see the light source, then there is a collimating lens where you make that diverging light beam to become parallel beam, and then you have the photo mask here. Some region it is opaque, some region it is transparent, and then once it passes through the mask, then some kind of diffraction pattern will be created. So you need to combine them with another projector mechanism here, and then before it falls on the wafer here, it is passed through some immersion medium in order to focus those beam together, and then the light will fall in a region of space. Okay. So you can see that the pattern in the mask is something like a perfect rectangular pattern, but what actually ultimately we get in the wafer may not be exactly a rectangular shape, but more or less like that. Okay, it may be some smooth boundary it may have, as it is shown here, some oval kind of shape. Okay, so it should be good enough, transferring process should be good enough in order to make the circuit work properly. Okay, so there is some amount of tolerance that we need to have. Okay, because we can't make the exact pattern as it is in the mask, we can't transfer it. Okay, all right. So now after the lithography is done, so what we ultimately create is basically the resist is made, the pattern is now in the resist. Okay, it is not yet transferred into the film. Okay, metal film or polysilicon film, it has not yet transferred. We created the pattern, so you can see that positive resist or negative resist, depending upon that we have created a pattern on the photoresist, not on the metal layer or the polysilicon layer, but ultimately our goal is to transfer that pattern into the metal layer. So for that we need another process which is called etching. Okay, we will come into that in a moment, but here what I am showing here is basically the structure of a photo mask. Okay, so this is the photo mask structure, and you can see that the opaque region, it is basically made up of, the base material is glass which is transparent to the light, and then on the top we have pure chrome and then chromium oxide on the top of it. So together, so chromium oxide cannot be directly put on the top or deposited on the top of glass because they don't bond well. So what is done is pure chrome is initially inserted, and then on the top we have chromium oxide, and chromium oxide coating is opaque to the light. So now how do we make this pattern? So this is another question. So we wanted to do pattern transfer. Now it looks like first of all we need to transfer the pattern into a photo mask, and then only you can use photo mask for a lithographic step in order to transfer it into the wafer. Now the answer is that we use electron beam lithography. Now electron beam lithography is the process of you irradiate it with a beam of electrons. Okay, so just like in old TVs you have what is called electron gun, right? So let me just draw a diagram to show. So suppose this is the so first a chromium will be coated throughout, okay, like completely it is coated with chromium, okay, chromium coated glass substrate, and then what we do is that we take an electron gun, something like this, I am just showing it, and then you focus the beam to some region where you want to remove it. Okay, so you coat it with again the photoresist. Okay, so just like you do it in lithography, you coat it with photoresist, and after that you take an electron gun and focus it on regions where you have to irradiate the photoresist. So photoresist property will be changed, and suppose we want to irradiate in this portion. So what we do is that from one side to another side I will make the beam to move like this. I will make the beam to move from one side. So I will scan the entire region of this photoresist where I want to remove the chromium material. Okay, so in that region what will happen is the photoresist will be changed because of the irradiation with ion. So it is not the same process because we are not irradiating light, it is basically the bombarding of electron beam on the resist. So it is a different kind of resist, not the earlier kind of resist. So with the impartation of energy, the chemical property will be changed there in the polymer, and then so that can be developed. Okay, so once you develop it, you have resist removed in places where you irradiate, and by scanning you can achieve different pattern. So you can scan the material wherever you want to remove. So you scan it, so you direct the beam go. So the beam will be controlled by a software in a computer. According to the layout, you will create a beam movement by raster scanning. So wherever you need to irradiate, you switch on the beam, otherwise you off the beam. So as it is scanning from top to bottom in a raster scan means like this, you go like this. So when it goes in places where you need it to irradiate, you switch on the beam, otherwise you switch off the beam. So if you do that, so wherever you switch off the beam, okay, there will be no pattern. So here I don't have any pattern. Okay, so wherever you have require the pattern, you switch it on the beam, and other place. So this is by scanning and switching on and off the beam, you can transfer the pattern to the resist, and then once you transfer pattern to the resist, then you develop it, and after developing you can go to what is called as etching. Okay, so etching is a common step for photo mask making, as well as creating the pattern on a film on the wafer. Now here is the etching. Now etching is also like there are multiple type of etching. So let me just denote it. Two major types of etching are one is called wet etching and the other is called dry etching. Now what is more popular is the dry etching. Wet etching is basically you just dip it into a chemical, and wherever the photoresist is not there, the layer is exposed in those regions. right? So if you look at here, so you can see that some places, so not this one, here, so some places you have the photoresist covering the red material, thin film. Some places they are open. Okay, so if you put it in a chemical, what will happen? Wherever it is exposed, it will, the chemical, appropriate chemical will react with it and then etch away. Basically it will remove those, but wet etching is not desirable because it is isotropic. Isotropic, what I mean is, basically it will etch not only in the downward direction, it will etch also in the lateral direction. So that means it will eat some portions underneath the photoresist which is remaining. So it is covering from above but not from the side, because once you etch these open regions, some of the side of the closed region will also become exposed and they will etch into that direction. So which is very undesirable, and that is why, to overcome this difficulty, we have anisotropic etching, that means direction dependent etching. Okay, so here is the diagram of dry etching, or the schematic diagram of the setup. So what you can see is the wafer is basically shown here in purple color. Okay, and two electrodes are there, the positive electrode and a negative electrode. One side it is grounded, the other side it is applied to a AC source. Okay, and what is going to happen here is that we are applying RF frequency 13.56 megahertz, a high power RF frequency. Okay, high power signal with the RF frequency that much. High power means hundreds of watts. Okay, so so lot of energetic or powerful RF wave is given here, and since RF wave is like changing direction, it's alternating in direction, the field will go up and down at very high speed, and because the value of this field is very large, it will basically strip the, so basically some material containing chemicals like fluorine is in this chamber. So the whole thing is inside a chamber where a particular gas which contain fluorine is inserted here. Now this fluorine, it is shown number 2. So number 1 is the negative electrode, number 4 is the positive electrode, and then 5 is the wafer, and 3 is basically the direction of plasma. Okay, so let me say how the plasma is created. Basically we are giving a very large amplitude RF field, and then that field will strip this fluorine atom. The electrons in the fluorine atoms will be stripped out. So it will basically become an ion. Okay, so that way you will achieve the plasma state. Okay, now once the electrons are stripped from the atoms, what will happen is that electrons have much lighter weight compared to the rest of the atom. Okay, the ion has lighter weight. Okay, so suppose the ion that is formed is negatively charged, and you are applying this frequency. At this frequency, like the ion is not able to move much, because the moment it tries to move in one direction, the field direction changes because of the inertia, and therefore it will just stay in the same place. It is not able to move to and fro. But electrons, they are lightweight candidates. Okay, its weight may be like 1,000 of the fluoride ions, and therefore they can move up and down. Okay, and now these electrons are going to hit on both electrodes. Okay, it will hit on, some will hit on the wafer and the other will hit on the electrode on the other side. Okay, here we have placed the wafer, and therefore it will hit on the wafer. Now the electrons which land upon the upper electrode, they are grounded and they are lost into the supply. But the electrode that hit on the wafer, they will remain. I think there is a change in the sign when electron leaves the fluoride ion. And this diagram, I don't know why. it is shown positive, it should be plus, or maybe they are showing electron and fluorine. Okay, but so the charge of the fluoride ion is plus. Okay, so maybe they are showing electron and fluoride ion separately. So let me just put plus in order to just show you that it is positive ions. Okay, electron is removed, so it becomes positive ions. So these positive ions can't move, but electrons will move. They will hit on the top electrode and it will be grounded. But when the electron fall on the bottom wafer, what will happen is that the wafer will get negatively charged. Okay, so there is an AC alternating field, but on the top of that, after some time, there is a DC voltage that is developed on the wafer. That's because of this electron getting deposited on the wafer, and these negative electrons will pull the fluorine ions. Okay, and you will reach some hundreds of volts here. Okay, large DC voltage will be developed between the electrodes and ions, and as a result, this plasma ions will just be pulled down, and they will hit on the wafer. And when they hit on the wafer, what will happen is sputtering. Sputtering is basically knocking out of the material wherever it get fall. But you see that there is photoresist. Okay, in some regions are not covered by photoresist. Photoresist is usually thick material, and wherever it is there, those region nothing happens to the red layer. But wherever red layer is exposed, those regions will get sputtered out. Basically, it will basically make this material to get out from its place. Okay, so this is anisotropic, means it is directional. So the etching will happen only vertically, it will not happen laterally, because the ions or the plasma is going to fall only vertical direction. So this is a very important step called reactive ion etching. So once this is done, then you can just remove the resist material in an appropriate chemical. So that step is called stripping the thing, stripping the the patterned photoresist which we saw earlier. We will strip it away. Okay, so once it is stripped away, you can see that once it is gone, so only underneath the material will have the pattern. So the layer is now, the metallic layer is now patterned. So we have transferred the pattern onto that particular layer. So similarly, we can do with any layer. Only thing is that we need to first coat or deposit that layer or grow that layer, and then so same procedure, then coat it with the photoresist, then exposure, alignment and exposure, and then developing, and then followed by etching. And while etching different layers, the material that we use in the reactive ion etching may be different. So that is the only place, because to etch away metal we may use one particular ion. To etch away different material, say for example silicon dioxide, we may use another material. So depending upon what can remove the material, accordingly we decide the gas inside the reactive ion chamber. Okay, so next another step, like when you once you transfer the pattern, either you can once you pattern the resist, either you can do etching or you can do doping. Okay, for example, doping is basically not changing the it is not basically changing the what do you call the material or removing the material. So etching is basically removing the material. Okay, so sometimes we create this for example, we are to start with we don't have a thin layer like this. Okay, we just have the silicon substrate, and then on the silicon substrate we don't have this say red layer. Okay, we have the silicon substrate, and on the top we did the spin coating, lithographical exposure and all of that, and then we patterned the resist. And after that, what we want to do is that wherever the resist is not there, we want to dope those region in the silicon substrate with a n-type impurity or p-type impurity. Okay, so this is what is called doping. So we don't want to pattern a particular layer, but we want to change the material or dope the material or the substrate into n-type or p-type wherever the photoresist is not there. So that is basically done. You can do it in multiple ways again, but the most popular that we will focus on is, so doping can be done in two different ways. One is basically called diffusion, which is not used much these days, and what is more common is ion implantation. Okay, diffusion and ion implantation. So this is the popular method right now. It has good control, and we don't need high temperature, and high temperature processes are always eliminated when you handle the wafer. Usually we don't expose to high temperature, because when if you expose to high temperature, what will happen is that all the n-type impurity and p-type impurity will move to far away regions, which is undesirable. So, and also metal, if you expose to high temperature, metal particles will evaporate. Okay, so these are undesirable things, and therefore we don't raise the temperature beyond some limit. Of course, there are certain processes we need to raise the temperature, but especially very high temperature process has to be avoided. Diffusion, if you want to use to dope, then you have to keep the material at a very high temperature. So that is why it is not common, and ion implantation is what is common. So now the setup for ion implantation is shown here. So here you can see on the right side, silicon wafers are placed on a chuck, okay, which is holding the wafer. Okay, there are multiple wafers here. You can see each wafer is shown with like a black color. Okay, it is a cross-sectional view. Okay, so tens of wafers are placed on this chuck, and then the chuck is able to rotate and position in such a way that it can align with the beam that is coming. Okay, now the beam is coming. This is an ionic beam. Ion of what? Ion of the impurity that you want to dope. If you want to dope p-type impurity, then boron ion. Okay, if you want to dope phosphorus impurity, then phosphorus ion. Okay, so this is the way to introduce that material into the substrate which you want to convert it to n-type or p-type. Okay, now if you look at there is an ion source here, the starting place. You have an ion source. Then this ion source means what? Basically you take boron atom, and by some means you need to ionize it. So one way is like you heat it up and you can ionize it. So if you heat up boron atoms, it will get ionized beyond some temperature. But when it ionizes and become plasma state, some boron atom will be like losing 2 electrons, some boron atom may lose 1 electron. So, or if you are taking boron atom with it in the form of a compound, say boron mixed with some other thing in some ratio, then that compound will also get ionized. So there are multiple. Some will have negative ionization, some will have positive ionization. So electron can come in, electron can go. So multiple things can happen. Okay, so if once it get ionized, so all kinds of radicals are there, and we need to decide which radical we need to choose. Okay, so for that what we use is a setup called mass spectrograph. Mass spectrograph is basically a equipment which can separate different radicals depending upon its mass and its ionic charge. Okay, basically you must have heard about E/M ratio, the charge to mass ratio. So depending upon the charge to mass ratio, So here there is a field applied here, okay, electric field, and once the beam is coming which has 2 plus ionization, 1 minus ionization, etc. So say boron minus, boron minus minus, boron plus plus, etc. So all these are coming, but then when it is subjected to an electric field, negative ion will deflect in one direction, positive will deflect in another direction. And then say suppose positive is deflected downward and negative is deflected upward, and some will not be deflected, okay, some will just go straight or something like that. So if you want to separate a particular deflection, then you just keep an opening there corresponding to a particular charge and a particular mass species should only be passed, okay. So say boron plus is getting passed, and boron minus is getting stopped by a stopper here, another boron plus is getting stopped here, so only boron plus is getting passed, okay. So then these ions, since they have charge, we can accelerate it, okay, by applying some potential, appropriate potential, okay. If it is a positive ion, you can accelerate it by applying a negative potential. If it is a negative ion, you can accelerate it by applying a positive potential. So you need to so these are some electrodes which are called accelerators, which will have these higher potential values in order to accelerate, pull the ions to increase its speed. And then ultimately what is done is there are final deflections, something like CRO. In CRO we have electron beam are accelerated and deflected, okay. So here we have ions which are accelerated and deflected, and the deflection mechanism will decide which region in the wafer or which wafer it is going to fall, okay. So they are going to fall, so mostly like many wafers are to be processed in one step. So you are loading some say 50 wafer onto this chuck, and they are kept there. So now all the wafers in this top regions, possibly you can deflect this beam and make this irradiation to go into all the wafers there, okay. So without rotating and keeping the chuck in a single position, you are able to cover the doping for a particular region here, okay. So then after that, so you need to irradiate for some period of time and with some dose. Dose means the number, the flux, how many ions are coming in per second, and then second parameter is the energy of this ion. This will decide the way the doping is going to happen. So here you can see that the different energies. So low energy means these ions will come and just sit on the top. That is not what we want. We want to dope the material. Now if you increase this ionic energy, what will happen? It will disrupt basically the top layer. The atoms will be, the silicon atom will go out, and then the boron atom will sit on the surface, okay. It will replace those. So that is also not desirable. What is desirable is these atoms should shoot inside. It should be high energetic itself. There should be sufficient energy to make it go through the spaces between the silicon atom and get finally stopped at some place underneath the layer. So the depth to which it goes, that is what is called range, okay. So you can see that different energy and the range, okay. Here you can see that 400 kilo electron volt, it can go up to nearly 1 micrometer. That much it can penetrate and reach. So you can see most of them get stopped there. If you reduce it to 200 kilo electron volt, it can go only up to 0.5 micrometer, okay. 100 kilo electron volt, it goes something like 0.25. For 50 kilo electron volt, it will get stopped at say some 0.15 or 150 nanometer depth. It will get stopped. So it will basically, all the dopant atoms will be going there. Now as you can expect, these are high energy atoms, and they are going to disrupt the crystalline nature there wherever it is going to fall. Okay, so it will fall into the crystal wherever the photoresist is removed after the lithography. Okay, if the photoresist is there, photoresist is usually a thick layer, 500 nanometer thick layer, and therefore if it is there, it will stop these ions, it will not let it enter into the silicon substrate, so it will not get doped. But wherever the photoresist is not there, ion implantation will go underneath and get stopped at different distance depending upon the energy. And you can see the dose is written as 10 raised to 15 per unit area, centimeter square, per unit time. Okay, you should have also per okay, so dose means it is the integral over the time. So if you want to have a doping concentration here, depending upon that, the dose is decided. Okay, so if dose is 10 raised to 15, that means in centimeter square you are making this many number of atoms, impurity atoms, to fall. Now how they are distributed? Are they distributed more like with a high concentration at a lower depth, or lower concentration at a deeper position? So that is decided by the profiles here. Okay, if it goes so much down, actually there is a large dispersion. Okay, so this is also one feature. So usually it is operated at different energy levels, so that entire region will get doped. Okay, if you want to dope it from 0 to say 1 micrometer or 500 nanometer, then you need to repeat the process with different energy levels, so that entire area can be doped from 0 to 500 nanometer. Now after this process, you can see that the entire crystalline structure will get messed up. The impurity atom will be sitting somewhere, and then the silicon bonds will get broken many places, and lot of dislocations. And so this is what I said, rupture of this crystalline structure. Now how to patch it up? What we do is, following the ion implantation step, every time we have what is called an annealing, thermal annealing. So we raise the temperature, not very high, we raise the temperature to tolerable limit, and then keep it for there at that temperature for some time, and we wait for some time. And in the meantime, the atoms will take its position according to the crystalline structure. So it is like a repairing work. Okay, so ion implantation actually spoil the crystallinity, and in order to restore it, we do the annealing, and automatically, because energy gets minimized when it sit in the equilibrium position, which is defined by the crystalline structure. Okay, and when it do like that, you can see that some of these crystalline points are occupied by now the impurity atoms, so they become active. As I told you earlier, if the impurity atom is sitting at a interstitial space or void space, then it won't be electrically active. Okay, electronic property will not be modified, so we need to activate it. So that means, so it's two things are happening. One is like impurity become active, and secondly the crystalline structure is restored. Okay, so these are the major process steps. So I said pattern transfer, which involved lithography followed by etching, and secondly I discussed ion implantation, which is basically material property changing following the lithography step. We are changing the material property. Wherever the resist is not there, we make it irradiated with ions of appropriate impurity atom, and then change the electrical property to n type or n plus or p type. Okay, whatever. So if it is a p mask that you have done, or p diffusion mask, after p diffusion mask it will be followed with the after the patterning with the p diffusion mask, the photoresist will be patterned, and then following that we do the ion implantation to do the p diffusion, create the p diffusion region in the substrate. If it is n diffusion mask, we do it with the n type impurity. But if it is like removal or patterning the metal or polysilicon, we do reactive ion etching. Okay, so in the next class what we will do is basically all the things that we discussed here in the process, like lithography and then etching and ion implantation. We will do it sequentially, one after the other, such a way that one NMOS and one PMOS will be created. Okay, so that will be called a CMOS process. Okay, so that's what we are going into. So today I will stop here. So we need, what is left is to look at CMOS process. Now CMOS process is a process in which we will create N type NMOS and PMOS. Okay, both of these devices will be created. So we will do a sequence of operation. At the end of it, we have a NMOS created, PMOS created on the wafer substrate, and where it has to be created, that will depend upon the circuit diagram and the layout corresponding to it. But that's not our point. That we have already, you are doing it in the software. For creating a NAND gate, you have to have two NMOS and two PMOS in such and such places. Okay, so once you do that from the layout diagrams created in the software, you need to transfer those patterns and also dope certain regions in the substrate as N type and P type, etc., and then create this NMOS and PMOS in places where you require it. Okay,